Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And what we have here is the next evolution of my Gemini spacecraft. So I am working on, as we speak, and it's again one of those things where I was working on this and I'm like, you know what, this would actually be more interesting if I just recorded the whole thing. But what I'm working on now is the latest version of the Gemini spacecraft. I've been threatening to roll my own service module for some time, and now I'm finally doing it. So I'm partway through the design process, but I've mostly finished up with what I'm actually going to be sending on the top of the spacecraft. So let's take a look. So jumping into the command pod itself, I have all of the same basic pieces. So I've got the nose docking mechanism, I've got the parachutes, I've got the re-entry control, all of that, and the heat shield is all stock, like that's all standard. But from there, I wanted to rethink the entire interface between the Gemini spacecraft and the rest of the launcher. So the first thing I wanted to do was rebuild the service module. So this part is roughly analogous to the equipment section, and we don't in fact have the adapter retrograde section with the retro motors. I don't think that that's particularly necessary. They're always fun to have, but I've never been in a situation that the retrograde section was actually necessary, except for my first orbital missions. So we're just going to throw that away, and we're going to rebuild the equipment section kind of manually. So what I've done is I've put that all inside of a conic procedural fairing. Just put that in there, and it's never going to come out. Like, I'm never actually going to separate that off. I have inside a big tank, service module tank, that is the vast majority of what we're using, and we've got that up to SM4, which is very nice. 75% utilization is lovely. And it's packed with food, oxygen, water, electricity, liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen with maximum MLI layers, and it's also inside of a fairing, which gives it that double layer of protection that we will need for that type of tank. So that's basically what the Gemini equipment section was. It had all of those things basically, in addition, but it also had some RCS fuel. It also had that, and then the engine, the fuel for the engine that it would use on the back, the little thrusters. So I've separated those out into a more efficient and higher thrust engine, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. The other thing that it had was, other than tankages, was it has fuel cells, LOX-to-GOX converter, and an O2 pressure converter. So I have up here on the left, I have my LOX-to-GOX converter, just a separate individual thing that does basically the same, performs the same task. And then over on this side, we have an O2 pressure controller. The interesting thing is you have a couple different options as far as what you use in your external ECLSS modules. So you could use nitrogen to maintain internal pressure, but I'm already creating and using oxygen, so we're just going to go with that. So it seems like there's just like one or two options at each step. So there's oxygen or nitrogen that you can use to create atmosphere. For scrubbing the carbon dioxide out of the air, you can use lithium hydroxide, or you can use a potassium oxide superoxide scrubber. The reason why I went with neither of those things is because the base Gemini pod itself still has a lithium hydroxide scrubber that you can't get rid of. Like, you can't take this off of the Gemini. So I figured, screw it, we'll just use it, and that's fine. It also comes with its own pack of lithium hydroxide on the Gemini capsule. So like I said, we're just going to leave that there. And I'm going to leave some emergency oxygen and food, water, electric charge, and the nitrogen for EVAs is all going to come from the command pod itself, and the which leaves the service module in the role of only extending the missions. So I'll put that back to O2 pressure control. Very nice. Okay, then I have 3 of these little fuel cells, and I have 3 of them because that's how many I needed. Turn off the launch pumps, and you can see that we are producing nothing and consuming 2.8 So if we take this off, we're down to 2.056. I found these to be a little bit flaky, so I'm going to have to test these in orbit. But if I turn it off and back on again, now we're producing some power. If we dump the water, then we get the full production of power. And so we'll just do that on each of these. There we go, 2.056. It matches the consumption exactly, which I find worrisome, but theoretically, each one of these was 0.75, so I should have 2.25. In theory, anyways. So, like I said, that's something that we're going to have to actually test on orbit to make sure that that works the way that I hope it does. Yeah, so that's my roll your own service module. We have that all packed up inside to take care of life support for our astronauts. So it's a little bit bigger, like it's a little bit longer, but a little bit less wide. And yeah, I just think that looks just fine. It's like a little tiny miniature version of the Apollo service module, which I like. So throw that away. And then as for the engine, we are going to use the AJ-10 Advanced, which is a Aerozine NTO hypergolic engine, and that allows us to use that as the fuel and also for the RCS thrusters here, and we will never ever have to tap into what's in the reentry control system because they do not overlap in any way. And that gives us a whopping 2,700 meters per second at maximum burn time. So with 2,700 meters per second of delta V, that leaves us in a fairly awkward position. With that, we can't quite get to the moon. And even if we could juice it up just a little tiny bit and get to the moon, we would not be able to get back. So my decision there is, so far, I have two options. I could either make this the official like Centaur, not Centaur, but the Titan III Tran stage, which was an actual upper stage that flew a bunch, which was 2 of these AJ-10s, and that might get us the delta V that we need. Or I could just attach this to a bigger upper stage that will throw it to the moon. And then the idea there would be that I get this on a trans-lunar injection trajectory, and then I use all of the delta V on this to circularize and then come back home. And that's actually tons of delta V for those 2 operations. That's plenty. It should be able to circularize. It should be able to rendezvous with something if needed, and then it should be able to get this vessel back home with the astronauts on board. So that is my theory on the design here. I may build a bigger, more advanced service module that has more fuel later on, but for these early lunar exploration missions, I think this is going to do just fine. The goals that I have for this thing are to do lunar orbit, possibly do some lunar rendezvous practice to see about meeting up with other vessels in lunar orbit, with the idea that I might be building a space station out there sooner rather than later. Because like I said before, I love the idea of the Lunar Gateway, and so having a space station around the moon that I could meet up with using this craft and then have a reusable lander attached to it sounds just lovely. I may or may not do that, but that's kind of what is on my mind as I'm building this. Those are the problems that this thing is designed to solve. So yeah, kind of where I left off was this design is kind of finished, and I really quite enjoy it. It's nice and small. It's I've tried a couple different engines, like the Agena, the GATV configuration of the Agena was another strong contender because of the 15 starts that it has. On the XLR 81 BA13 has 15 ignitions, which is lovely, and it has a specific impulse of 291, which is not as good as this, but it also it has double the thrust, which might be a thing that's nice depending on what applications we're trying to get to. But I decided to go with the lighter, smaller, more efficient engine for this, because the Apollo service module was based on this design. It's just a much bigger version of exactly that engine. So yeah, this is the Apollo version. It's just they just keep getting larger. So anyways, that's kind of what I'm thinking for now, and I may revisit that, but that's the nice thing about rolling your own service module, is that you can tweak the design as much as you want, and there's no rigid predefined parts that you have to worry about. So we are going to try to throw this at the moon, and my thought was, why don't I just make a big freaking J2 stage and throw the whole damn thing at the moon? Like, have this be my second stage and also my lunar transfer stage. Unfortunately, the amount of liquid hydrogen that a J2 stage is going to need is just massive to get to the, to the rated burn time. But we have pretty close to the right numbers here. And I'm not 100% clear why my delta V is going down from 3,000 to why my delta V is going down when I attach this, but I'm just gonna have to hope that that's fine. Something linked up improperly here, I am sure, but I can't figure out what it is, so we're gonna move on. So anyways, looking at the numbers, this doesn't quite have the delta V to get to the moon. It has about 2,000 meters per second of delta V in this upper stage left over after it gets into orbit. So that means, obviously, since it's so big, we are going to have to expand our lower stage as well, which I was hoping to not have to do, but you know, is what it is. Alternatively, I expand this to see how that would work, and make a bigger upper stage that doesn't need as big of a lower stage to get out there. So those are kind of my options and thoughts on that at the moment. So let's fiddle around with the numbers and see what we get. All right, so here is my second design attempt, and I'm not sure this one's going to work either. We have 5 E1 engines, which were a considered alternative to the F1. They're basically double the thrust of a single H1, so about 1,800, 1,900 kilonewtons of thrust compared to the 920 on an H1, which is, you know, lovely, but to maximally burn them, I've got kind of a Saturn V configuration here where I have 5 of them all stacked up on a 6-meter core, and that actually gives us just about a perfect amount of delta V. So we have a grand total of, after we take away the 9,200 to get into orbit, we have almost exactly 3,200 meters per second left over to get to the moon using this J2 upper stage, which would be lovely if we were not over the pad weight. Yes, we are indeed dealing with the 700-ton pad still, and I'm quite certain that if I do this a little bit more intelligently, I should be able to get this done on that pad, and I think that's going to be a 3-stage design. So let me go play with some different engines, and we'll see what that looks like. All right, so this design fits the parameters that I have set. It is a 3-stage design that is vaguely modeled on the Saturn V. It is going to use as an upper stage 4 RL-10A3-3s. It has a second stage of an LR-87 LH2, something that I actually really quite like, but needs a very large stage, and I couldn't make this as just the straight up upper stage, even though it does have 2 ignitions, which would have been a fun thing to play with. And then we are trying once again with just 4 of those E-1 engines to replace the 6 H1s that were not giving me quite as much thrust as I needed. So this in theory will work. I'm a little bit concerned about this stage here because that is just about 3 minutes into our flight, we are going to drop down to a thrust to weight ratio of less than 1, and so we are going to have to be very careful about what our trajectory looks like at that point, so that we can make sure that we actually get to orbit and don't just fall back down. That low of a thrust to weight ratio on the ascent can lead to some very wonky things, so we're going to have to probably pitch this very slowly over, which I was going to need to do anyways because its thrust to weight ratio on the surface is already fairly low. So that's just something to check out in testing, but in general, this should work. This will get into orbit with about 3,800 meters per second of delta V remaining on this RL-10 stage, which we will then be able to use to throw our new Gemini service module out towards the moon. So let's give this a test and see how this works. All right, here we have the massive new launch vehicle on the pad, which I think is going to be named as an evolution of the Paladin series of rockets. So this is probably my Paladin 2, I think. I had plans for a Paladin 2, but it hasn't actually come around yet. So this is either a Paladin 2 or just straight to Paladin 3, probably the 3. Johnny Flores is fuzzing out, which is something that happens when you don't have the... when you have someone in simulation that is able to technically go, but is not actually able to go by RP-1's rules. So yeah, that's going to make this a little bit weird. So let's see how that goes. But yeah, we're just here doing a little simulation, a little bit of testing to see how this thing will perform. So I'm just going to launch this into a regular 150 kilometer orbit. We are not going to be pitching over at 2 degrees per second, I don't think. We're going to be doing something more like 0.4, starting at 50 meters per second. Coast is fine, I think. Auto stage. I don't think I have anything that needs to hot stage, so we're going to turn that off. All right, so let's engage that autopilot. 3, 2, 1. Ignite the engines. And we are away very, very slowly. Yeah, so I'm not going to belabor this point too much about this testing because it's not super... It was whipped all the way around there. I don't think that was necessary. Let's see. Where am I supposed to be pointing at this point? Force roll. Like 90 degrees. No, is it 180 or is it just 0? Yeah, 0 degrees it is. Yeah, so I'm just testing this out and we're just going to kind of see what the performance looks like. My biggest thing that I'm interested in seeing is what it looks like when this thing stages off the first stage and moves on to the second stage. Like, if that works, I'm confident that the rest of this will work, but I really need to know what that's going to look like. So we zip ahead just a little bit. E1 engines pushing us really nicely. Getting up into vacuum guidance and pointing ourselves yeah, at a pretty good trajectory. This might actually be just fine because we still have 40 seconds to go. The E1 engines have a nice long burn time, which I like. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool to be able to switch directly to the E1s and not go, or switch to the E1s and not go directly to the F1s when those come available. All right, so we are at almost 60 kilometers, so that's still fairly dangerous territory, but that comes off, and the little low thrust LR87 LH2 has ignited, and we are pointing pretty far up, and we are also rolling slightly. This thing burns for just like a really long time. Not as long as the RL10s, but I actually don't care very much about the roll, so I guess we're just going to see how that works. So this right here is a symptom of the problem of the low thrust on this stage. You see we're still pointed like more than 20 degrees off of the horizon, and we are well out of the atmosphere and should be working to circularize at this point. So that's why that would be the case, is because this is so low thrust, we need to be pointing up to be constantly gaining both horizontal speed and also maintaining our vertical speed, keeping that from going too far negative at this point. So we're lofting up over our target trajectory, falling back down towards it. We just crossed our apogee, I believe, and now we are going to be just like trying to nullify our vertical speed a little bit as we accelerate towards orbital velocity. So there's definitely some inefficiency there. We're just about to stage again. Okay, no, it's fine. It looked like that was stuck for a second there. All right, so the 4 RL10s are burning real nicely and rolling us back to the intended face-up direction. We have about 1 million years of this burn to go, so let's get that moving forward. And we are still pointed just underneath 20 degrees above the horizon. So, like I said, yeah, this is a relatively inefficient inefficient launch. We have, I don't understand how that number is going down, but that's fine. But we have spent a little bit less than 800 meters per second on gravity losses. Drag losses are minimal, that's great. And our steering losses are huge. Like, these steering losses are absolutely atrocious, and that is the penalty of the low thrust to weight ratio. So building something that was a little bit more punchy off of the ground would probably get us a better path to orbit, perhaps, but I'm kind of landed on this design, and it looks like it's going to come in at just under 9,200 meters per second, I think, to get to this orbit. Just a very basic orbit, but... And there we go. Yep, just under 9,200 meters per second at delta V, which leaves us with 3,500 meters per second on this stage remaining, which is plenty to get to the moon. So yeah, that is kind of what I'm thinking. I'm going to need to put RCS on this, so that's going to decrease my numbers as well a little bit. But that is, you know, the next thing to worry about. So I will do that, and then that will get us off towards the moon. Let's just push this a little bit. No good reason. Gorgeous. All right, so let's test the rest of this thing. I don't like how washed out this view is. Like, this is just a blinding, like, completely plain white, and I'm not sure. I think that's probably just because I have my ambient lighting up so high. But anyways, so let's say we are on the way towards the moon now. Then we... Whoa! Okay, so I think the collar on this that fairing was a little tight. Okay, so yeah, we'll work to fix that. Great. And it also looks like we have insufficient avionics, I think, because we don't actually have a pilot. Yeah, because it's not counting Johnny Flores here, because he technically is not allowed to fly this. So we're actually probably going to have to continue this testing, probably put like an avionics module on here for actual computer control, which I hate doing, but it's what you do when your astronauts are out of commission. It's either that or I wait until they're not to be able to actually do the testing, which, you know, is not an ideal scenario either. Yeah, so I guess I have a little bit more work to do on this, but I think this is the broad strokes of the design of my new Paladin 3 Gemini launch vehicle, which is going to be the trans-lunar launcher of the Gemini spacecraft. Fantastic. So that is what we will do. I will do some more work on that, and we will see how that goes a little bit later on. Okay, a couple small things that I want to talk about the design of this after having done some testing and worked out a couple of the bugs anyways, is the tooling is stupid expensive, and part of that is the fact that I left this as a balloon tank from the smaller days, and that's pretty expensive. So if we take a look here, this balloon tank is going to cost $200,000 to tool. Compare that to the even bigger integral tank, which I'm using the new aluminum copper alloy gridded tank, or whatever it is, from the latest materials science, is going to cost me $180,000 to tool for a bigger a bigger tank. So this would be tooling two different things, completely separate tanks at the 6-meter diameter, and I'd really rather just do one. So I think we may want to just do this as a, unfortunately that means I have to pull it apart, but I would probably like to do this as an integral tank as well, because that is going to save me a bunch of money on tooling, and it's a monster, so I think a giant 6-meter balloon tank is a little silly anyways. All right, so in changing this tank up, we actually lose a fairly significant amount of delta V, like almost 600 meters per second, but we also save about 120,000 funds, which is, you know, pretty nice. And that's going to also be cheaper in the long run as well. So I may need because of that, to actually extend this tank slightly, because this puts us actually just on the edge of being able to actually accomplish the mission. And the other change that you'll notice is that I now have 2 of these LR87 LH2s, and we're not fully burning them. I'm just not stressed about that. But I did want to have those 2 of them on there to get my thrust to weight ratio up, because that allows us to fly on a much more efficient trajectory, which saves us, ironically, it saves us some fuel by having more on there, I think. It allows me to put on a little extra fuel to get us a little more delta V. It does bring our surface level thrust on our E1 main stage down a bit, but I really don't think that that's going to be too troublesome. As a point of reference, the Saturn V had a launch thrust to weight ratio of 1.16. So this is real sluggish off the pad, to the point where it's probably really not great. But I think that it makes up for it with the big Hydrolox 2nd and 3rd stage. So that is what we are going to do with that. So yeah, everything else is pretty much as you saw, but I just ironed out a couple bugs in my testing. So let's move on to launching something for real. All right, here we have on the pad a Cecil-1 rocket that is bearing up Lunicom. Ignition. And we have liftoff. There we go. And we have a lovely Cecil-1 rocket, which I have not used very many of. It's a nice light launcher that can throw little payloads at the moon, like, for example, little satellites that will hopefully rescue our rover with better communications. Yes, indeed. So that is what this is intended to go do. Let's go ahead and zip this forward. But yeah, so this is launching on a H1 LR-79 configured rocket on the first stage, and then it has a single RL-10 up on top. Very nice, very efficient for small payloads, even ones that are headed out towards the moon because of all of those ignitions. So we are making our way up here, and this is actually launching just ahead of our big telecom launch, because I just wanted to do something really quick for the for this one here before we get on to that one, because that is going to be a big involved process. Oh no, we have an ignition failure on the solid fuel. Oh my gosh, and we are flipping out. But just one flip and now we are okay? Question mark? Goodness gracious. Yeah, it looks like one of the solid thrusters actually failed to ignite. And I'm not sure why this flipped out otherwise. Maybe my it looks like my launch trajectory was still a little bit too aggressive. I probably could have gone down. I think I have this on 0.6, but 0.5 probably would have been just fine for this thing. But anyways, hopefully this will still have enough to get us out towards the moon. We will see how that goes. The RL-10 is quite an amazing engine, so I think we might be okay. But yeah, so this is my attempt to send out just a plain old little communication spacecraft that is going to do some orbital, some communications around the moon. As you can see, it is fairly small and limited in its nature. Basically just an engine with some big radar dishes and some gigantic solar panels on it. But that's really all we need. I'm just going to try to put this out into an orbit around the moon that is... Hopefully it's helpful for both this particular mission, but is also something that we can use for a lot of future missions. So it's going to want to be a nice high orbit. you see that we have both a big S-band, well, not that big, not the biggest I could have anyways, an S-band dish on the end here, which is going to do our communications back with Earth. And then this actually has an S-band omni antenna at tech level 3. The reason for that is because the satellite that I have, or the rover, has an S-band omni antenna as well. So yeah, that's basically the only thing that I could have done. We do have tech level 1 UHF communications on the probe itself, which may be able to catch some communications, but it's not the primary mode that this thing has. That's going to be a very weak signal providing communication if it is used at all. But all three of these things, or both the S-band and the this UHF here, ought to be helpful for things that we are sending out to the moon. So we will see how that goes. All right, so double checking our status here, we have made it to orbit with just 3,643 meters per second left over, which is just fine by me. So let's go ahead and do our plan to get out to the moon. All right, so 3141, and I'm going to focus target, because what I'd like to do is, we know that our lunar rover is around this area somewhere, so we need to make sure that our orbit is at least over it, sort of. But what I would like to do is adjust my orbit a bit. Whoops. Yeah, because we could do this equatorial orbit, but I think something more polar might be helpful. Okay, so it may be best actually for me to just make an on-course correction to make this into a polar, make our intercept with the moon a bit more polar, so that I can then get into, let's see, maybe not totally polar, but like we'll do something very inclined anyways. Very inclined and very high in the orbit is what I am looking for. So yeah, we'll aim for something like this, and then we will adjust from there. All right, we are ullaging up our RL-10. Slowly, slowly, very unstable. And there we go. We are ignited. Everything is wonderful. We are on our way. All right, yeah, so after we get this done, I'm going to be sending up our telecom spacecraft, which is going to be our geostationary communications network, and that is going to be finished before we... I love having two production lines is what I'm going to say about that, because we have... I have my Gemini L1, which is my new nomenclature for... Oh, we are spinning around. Okay. How about you stop? Stop doing what you're doing, please. Kill rotation. I'm talking about something completely unrelated. So I put the Gemini L1, which is my new nomenclature for my Lunar Gemini spacecraft. That is in my top slot for my big production line, and then my Telenet is in the small one, and we are just knocking out small spacecraft while this thing is building, which I love. So it allows me to make as much progress as I possibly can, but I can also get missions out fairly rapidly, especially smaller ones. So yeah, that is, I wanted to get this one out soon. But first, we're going to try to rescue this mission, because we are actually full on contracts right now. I have 10 contracts, and I have missions out and about for all of them, and I have no idea if they're going to succeed or not. So we can't, I'm like stuck in a holding pattern at about 3 million funds, wanting to buy the big astronaut complex upgrade in preparation for my Apollo shenanigans, but it's also, you know, I'm not quite there yet. I'm not quite ready. So yeah, we'll just see about that. I need to complete some of these missions to get some money so I can actually start spending on the infrastructure to get that stuff rolling. But anyways, yeah, so we have this kind of ready to roll. We are on our way out, so I am just going to fly out, and we can extend our solar panels. They point downwards, but you know, that's what it is. And we're going to extend this dish here. which lays down flat in the opposite direction so that, you know, so that the dish isn't pointing into the sun. I guess I'm not sure why that matters, but, you know, I like the idea of, you know, the sun being one way and Earth being the other, at least some kind of semblance of having to point my dishes in the correct direction. Not that that actually matters in a mechanical sense. So, okay, let's see what our trajectory looks like. Focus target. I love this. Okay, so on the way, I think like about halfway out there when we're moving nice and slow, or most of the way out there while we're moving nice and slow, I am then going to use a little bit of delta V to put us into a very inclined, very high orbit. So this is 7 million meters above the surface of the moon. Yeah, I'm just checking now to see just how far out I can go before it before I lose this entirely, because I want a very high orbit, because this will allow me to spend most of my time with a good connection with Earth and not very much time with the Earth eclipsed by the moon's surface. There will be some periods where that is the case, and that is inevitable, but for the vast majority of the time, we should have good signal. So yeah, this looks fine, and this looks like it's going to be directly over our site, so that is fabulous. So let's plan for this. This is going to be a 216 meter per second correction burn, and let me just make sure what our trip looks like all up, because we're not actually needing to circularize too far in. Oh, look at that. I actually have a ton more room. Well, we can get circular around here, and that I think this is probably fine. We don't need to be, I don't think we need to be out here. Although, why not? Like, why not be just a little bit further out? I think, yeah, I made kind of bad decisions on this particular path because I underestimated just how big the sphere of influence of the moon is. I'm used to dealing with the tiny potatoes of Phobos and Deimos is the last thing that I was working on, so that makes that a lot different. So anyways, there we go. Why don't we just do that, like way the heck out there, 50 million meters. Let's see if we do the planning GUI, Solarback rover, between this and the Solarback rover at 50 million meters. Brush planner. Yeah, at 50 million meters, we're going to have no connection with UHF. Although I'm not sure this would have any... Oh, it's because it's an S-band antenna. I'm not sure why I thought that was going to be helpful in any way. Let's just extend this one, and we'll do the planning here. Aha, see, this is why you check this sort of thing. See, we would not actually have a connection with this antenna with the Solarback. We would have nothing at 50 million meters. So the highest that I could go and still get signal is 1 million meters. Wow. This is an S-band, right? I guess it's, yeah, that's the difference between using just little spacecraft antenna. So I can only get up to 1 million meters. Like I can't even go to 2 without it completely zeroing out on me. So yeah, that looks like this, which there would still be plenty of times where that would actually be useful. But gosh, man, I did not anticipate just how weak of an antenna the onboard spacecraft antenna is versus talking to, you know, the deep space network. Like I even thought like just relaying it would actually be no problem even at pretty huge distances, but wow. So yeah, that's let's plan for that. Even at S-band. Wow, okay. All right, well, let's try that. Let's just try it and see what happens. We were going to have to do a much lower orbit than I had anticipated, but that's fine. So we're just going to make a plan to do something like this, and this should give us plenty of time that's in communication with Earth and also in communication with the Solarback rover. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to check my trip. I'm using precise maneuver now instead of precise node because it has the plus-minus orbit, which unfortunately means I need to like spend time figuring out how the hell to use this comparatively. Yeah, I don't see that this has like a trip amount, but you can just look at both of your nodes together. So this is only going to cost me 730 or 740 meters per second at delta V, so we have plenty. So I'm going to go ahead and disengage from the spacecraft. We have insufficient avionics until we turn it on. There we go. RCS on. Okay, good. I get very worried about these things. All right, so there we go. Let's go ahead and execute our maneuver on the way to the moon. All right, so we are just getting ready for our mid-course correction on the way to the moon, firing up our little Aerozine thruster. And yeah, this cute little thing is just for this communication mission, basically. And I'm glad that we're doing this because this is helping me to test and figure out what kind of things we would need for relay satellites. And it's definitely made me realize that I overestimated how well these, even the communitrons will communicate with each other, given that they are just little radar dishes and they're not talking to massive deep space network antenna. So yeah, that is that. Let's see what that looks good. Well, not really, actually. Hold on. That actually looks terrible. Okay, I just need to adjust this just slightly so that we can make sure that we do indeed get to that 1 million mark. But we're just going to kill our rotation. I'm just going to turn this off, and we can probably make this burn right now. There we go. And use RCS to trim it down, because I want to be just underneath the 1 million meter mark so that we have that correct orbit locked in. All right, we are going to circularize our orbit. And there we go. Perfect. Beautiful. So that's going to be what we do. All right, we are coming around the far side of the moon, preparing for our burn to circularize into this orbit. Just a couple seconds until we fire that up. Nice little efficient Aerozine and NTO generic thruster. All right, so that is going. And yeah, so we are going to push this little thing into orbit, and I am hopefully going to be able to get some good communications out of that. With just 1 million meters above the lunar surface, I'm hoping that is going to be far enough to get good communications with Earth and get into basically this situation exactly, where I have communication with all this stuff that can't see the Earth, but I can still see the Earth. Further away would obviously be better, but there's only so much that you can do with when you're talking with antennas to other antennas. I'm just really glad that I checked this before I actually got there, because I would have been real sad if I would have gotten this into the right orbit and had it overhead and be like, all right, let's see how this works, and oh, it doesn't. Grand. So yeah, we'll make sacrifices that will hopefully allow it to at least work for this mission, if not for forever and ever for other missions in the future. We'll just have to see how that works. All right, so we are just finishing up this orbit, and it looks terrible. Like, that just does not look right at all compared to what I tried to do. Yeah, I'm really not 100% sure what happened here. I guess I'm just going to have to fix this at the perigee and the apogee, or the paraloon and apoloon of this orbit, which is kind of a pain. Like, I'm not sure why this was so far off, but small amounts of corrections with RCS, because the RCS on this is relatively powerful compared to the, looks like we got plenty to do this, so I'm not that worried about it. What do you call it? Ooh, we are rotating. Hold on. The RCS is pretty powerful relative to the small satellite bus that we have here, so it causes it to fly kind of change my trajectory quite a bit when I've been making adjustments pointing towards the sun and all of that. All right, we are just about to our paraloon. Fabulous. So let's just go ahead and do this very simply. We're going to point retrograde to our orbit. We only have 300 meters per second of delta V remaining, but that should be plenty to fix this up. I would like my paraloon now to be under 1 million meters, remember, because that is about as far as our S-band Communotron 16 to Communotron 16 will operate. And there we go, 989 sounds fine to me. We are gonna fly around now to our Apolloon, stop, prograde, and we're gonna bring that up. And there we go, simple as that. 998 by 957 is looks like as good as it's going to get. All right, so let's go ahead and point ourselves up towards the sun to our final locked in position that is going to carry us through our orbits from now on. Make sure that we are all set up. We have this antenna extended, and this antenna is operational as well as it's going to get. I don't really have any science on this thing, and I'm just not that worried about it. But we take a look at Lunicom info on that. We have perpetual power generation there. You'll notice that our power generation is ridiculous compared to what we actually need on this thing. Even with the 3 different transmitters we have on there, we're doing about 8 times as much power, maybe a little less than 8 times, 6 or 7 times as much power as we actually need. But that's because I want this to last several years. I would like this to last for a very long time, so I'm basically planning for the wear to get to like 60 or 70% and still be providing enough power to this spacecraft to provide some communications. I would like it to be an important part of our lunar exploration. But if we come around, I would like to give this the best possible chance. But yeah, you saw some connections there. I would like very much to see if I can get into a place where I have connection with the rover. So we are almost directly overhead. Okay, I have no idea if that's just like too far or what, but I guess we're gonna go see. All right, so it looks like my Centaur is going on an adventure, but I don't have communication, unfortunately. It looks like it's probably too far. That away and turn on just relays. Set that as target. Okay, so it's actually just over 1 million meters away, so I may need to lower my orbit even more. Oh, it also doesn't help that my batteries are dead, so I don't think it would... I think that's probably more the problem than anything else. So I may have to just wait and test this when I have batteries on the Solarback, which should be in not terribly long. It looks like we're coming out of our long lunar night period, and hopefully the batteries will turn back on, and this thing will be able to get signal and maybe do some roving, because I have indeed installed Bon Voyage, which would be a lovely thing for this to do so that I don't have to do all the roving manually and probably flip and destroy my craft. I've also got Waypoint Manager installed, which is the reason why I didn't have that. So if I activate navigation, I could see that it's over that way. But yeah, so we will test that when I have power on this spacecraft, so I will have to check in again. But I think that is where we're going to leave it. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Like and subscribe and all of that, and I will see you next time.